If you've ever worked on a Business Central implementation, you already know this truth. Migration is where projects either stay on track or completely unravel. It's expensive, it's fragile, and for years, most of us just accepted that as part of the process. But today's guest didn't. Welcome to IAMCP Profiles and Partnership, the show where we spotlight the founders, partners, and innovators shaping the Microsoft ecosystem from the inside out. In this episode, I'm joined by the founders of Ledger Migrator, a company that saw financial migration not as an unavoidable pain point, but as a problem worth solving. We'll talk about how they went from partner frustration to product innovation, why they built explicitly for Business Central, and what it means to finally make data migration faster, more reliable, and scalable for partners. We'll also dig into the role IAMCP has played in their journey and why showing up in community isn't just good networking, it's good business. Let's get started. Robert, Jerry, welcome to the podcast today. We're really excited to have you guys on.
Thanks, Anthony. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Excellent. Well, I know we have a lot of ground to cover. Really excited to kind of get into it today. But let's start off. Tell us a little bit, about yourself and the company.
Well, I've been in IT since 1986 for a while now. In fact, my whole family is in IT. And I've been predominantly working within the Microsoft partner ecosystem since about 2013. I joined IAMCP, I think the first time I joined them in the UK was 2014. And since then, even when I wasn't working for a Microsoft partner, I have maintained my membership or association and kept in touch via LinkedIn and WhatsApp. But predominantly, it's been in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. I did a contract for Microsoft for a while, working as a partner enablement manager in their Teams meeting room group. And one of the cool things that happened to me there was one of my colleagues, a lady called Janet Harris, was the original, worked on the original design of MS Config. And she even had a framed napkin from the restaurant where they'd done the initial sketches of it.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought was quite nice. Known Jerry, we've been working on and off together on various projects and businesses since the turn of the century, so getting on for 26 years now.
That's great. And Jerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I haven't been in IT quite as long as Robert, but I've done. I've still done a fair few years. Two areas really in my background. One is sort of software development, where I've done a lot of Python and Java software development, and I've also been involved in a lot of ERP migrations. So things like Oracle Financials, JD Edwards initially, and then more recently, some of the Microsoft ERP suites, especially Business Central.
Excellent. And now Robert, I know you're a big fan of IAMCP. When did you join IAMCP?
So I joined the first time in 2014. As far as I can work out, I was actually looking back through old emails to see when I first got in touch, and it looks like it was either the very end of 2013 or the beginning of 2014. And I was working at a time for a company there called Systems Up. And if you think of what's happening in Microsoft now, in that if you don't mention Copilot, they don't want to talk to you. At that time, it was exactly the same, but it was Azure. It was cloud. Because everybody was doing on-premise things and they wanted to get you to the cloud. In fact, in the very beginning, Azure hardly existed and there were no accreditations. It was very early at that stage. Needs to be said as well, I'll just embarrass my colleague there. One of the things that I was lucky was working with Jerry around 2011, 2012, and he was one of the first people to introduce me to the idea of cloud computing. So this is almost before the cloud existed, when it was more hosted through rack server and places. So Jerry was very much leading edge on that.
Well, I wasn't planning to go there, but you kind of opened up the story there. But just, Jerry, maybe a little briefly, Robert's talking about how it's kind of a leading edge early adopter into cloud. Maybe just, share a little bit the audience about that, and then we'll kind of jump into, about Ledger Migrator.
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. So, yeah, Robert's right. It was very early. So, we had just colo servers initially, and running things like remote desktops onto colo servers, which was kind of a Heath Robinson version of what things like AWS and Azure became a couple of years later. So we kind of saw that direction of travel quite early, luckily, and didn't really get involved in AWS very much. But as soon as Microsoft launched Azure, then we did a lot of work around that, and helped a lot of customers with that transition from on-prem into the cloud, which was really exciting.
Well, definitely then, I'm looking forward to hearing about that, just being able to, quote unquote, see into the future and peer around that innovation curve and how, you brought that to Ledger Migrator. And, for folks listening, let's talk about that, about what is Ledger Migrator. For someone hearing about it for the first time, how would you describe, the company and what you do in just the simplest terms?
Okay, so I'll go first with the simplest terms. Basically, we migrate financial data from systems into Business Central, and it's various systems, mostly on-prem. And the key thing that we do is we don't just migrate the master data, so the ledger of accounts and the opening balances. We allow for the migration of all the financial data, so all the history, going back to however much data they have in the system. This, in some ways, makes us virtually unique. We can't find anybody who does exactly the same thing. And it's probably worth saying that when I started doing some market research about this, one of the interesting things that I found was I would speak to Business Central partners and ask what they do about financial data, historical, getting it in. And really what they would say is, well, we normally speak to the customer and persuade them they don't need it. When we have a proper discussion with them, they say they don't need it. But then the observation they have is, yeah, I guess we kind of lead the witness to get the answer we want because it's difficult. And that was what we found in the initial market research. I think for more detail about how the genesis of this, I'm better to pass to Jerry, because in many ways this was his brainchild, which he invited me into.
Yeah, that's right. And it's some of what Robert called out there. I've been involved in a large number of ERP migrations over the years, and the data migration is always one of the more challenging and risky parts of it as well. It's the one that normally causes the project to be delayed, because it's always more complex than people imagine it's going to be. And that just keeps biting people over and over again. So yeah, we saw an opportunity really. I think we were genuinely surprised that nobody's done this already, because it's such a big issue and such a big pain point for most ERP migration projects. So we were surprised that we couldn't find anything that did something similar. But having convinced ourselves that there wasn't anything out there, we took up the challenge to be the first to market with it. And it also, touching on something we talked about earlier, it also just continues that kind of on-premise to cloud journey as well, because what we're seeing now is the infrastructure has been done or is being done. But this is a continuation of that. Now the business applications need to get into the cloud as well, and the ERP applications. So we're kind of facilitating that process as well.
What caused you to actually look into that, to realize that this is a problem?
Just the experience that we'd had of doing it the old-fashioned way, which should, in every ERP project I've worked on, it's been a case of running extract programs against the legacy system, producing more Excel workbooks than you could possibly want in your lifetime, and then trying to get that Excel workbook information uploaded into the new system, and then, trying to cleanse the data and validate the data as you do that. And as I said earlier, it just gets more and more complex, and you spend more and more time on it. It's just I just can't find the words to explain how painful that process is. So we were just desperate to solve that problem, really. Ledger Migrator is our answer to how we solve that.
Excellent. Now, with with the ERP solutions that are out there, Why did you decide to build specifically, for the Microsoft ecosystem and, to be, even more specific, like Business Central?
Well, there's a few reasons for that. First of all, and Jerry can contradict me here, but the problem he's described, when you look at enterprise customers and the enterprise systems, they solve it through pure grunt and cost. They will spend hundreds of thousands minimum and probably millions on doing the data migration. So when you look at the larger systems, they're kind of sorted. But when you look at Business Central, which is very much a mid-market play, companies really can't afford to spend tens of thousands of dollars on migrations, and certainly not if it's going to get into six figures. So that's the first thing that interested us about that particular part. As well as that, Microsoft themselves are putting a lot of effort and resources into growing Business Central, and they have their on-premise systems like Great Plains and Dynamics SL, which used to be known as Solomon's, and the Vision. They are pushing as customers all the time to come off them and go into Business Central, which is their cloud-based system. And lastly, it's because we are very much a partner play, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And if you're going to sell to partners, there is nothing better. I'm slightly biased here, but I'll still say it. There is nothing better than the Microsoft partner ecosystem. As I said, I've been in IT for nearly half a century, well, 40 years, and no software company treats their partners with as much care and as much diligence as Microsoft. They really invest, they scale through partners. So if you are a partner play, it's a really good place to focus on.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So let's piggyback on that. So when you talk to Microsoft partners, right, and business like finance leaders, what do they say is the hardest part about migrating financial data into Business Central?
I'll have a first stab, but bear in mind that Jerry's more of a technical expert. It's always around the same thing. Once you get past the opening balances and the ledger of accounts, anything beyond that is really difficult to do and is manual. So you have almost just diminishing returns that it becomes harder to take that history in. And the big question becomes the value of that history within Business Central, which is growing all the time because of Copilot and AI.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But, I'd emphasize what I said earlier about how difficult the part of the project this is. It's probably, in most projects, it's the most difficult part, which is why, Robert alluded to earlier, a lot of partners eventually talk their customers out of migrating the data, even though they would really like it and they see it as a, sometimes not a must-have, but a very strong nice-to-have. But when presented with the cost and the complexity and the risk, they kind of get beaten into, okay, we can live without it. It's not ideal, but we'll start with a clean sheet of paper and live without it. But they really, if you speak to the finance directors and the CFOs, they really do want the data. They've just been persuaded that it's just too difficult to do. If we can go back round to them and say, actually, there's new tools available and it's not so difficult, then that's a completely different conversation. And that's the conversations that, that we want the partners to have now with our tool in play.
Just listening, it just baffles me that it's like, man, it's the end of 2025. What? Financial data just seems like something that really should have been figured out a long time ago. So I think it's just amazing, I guess one, that it hasn't been dealt with, and two, the fact that you saw that. But just share a little bit, we have to go into a lot of detail, but why has financial data migration just traditionally been like either expensive, risky, and time consuming for partners and clients?
I think it's a Jerry question.
Yeah, I think I'll take that one. So trying to drill down to that complexity a little bit. So obviously you're changing, the first point is you're changing ERP systems. So you've got issues other than data migration to address. You've got to make sure that the new ERP system fits the business processes of the the customer and they're happy with it and so forth. Once you've done that, then the data migration is kind of the next biggest challenge. And they're two different systems. So the data's held slightly differently, slightly different terminology. Things are structured differently in the source system and the target system. So every project is kind of addressing that complexity from scratch. There's no other tooling available. There hasn't been tooling available in the past. So every project is looking at the source system in detail, working out where all the data is, how do we get it out, and then they're looking at the target system and the opposite problem: how do we map this data and get it into the new system? And it's just very time consuming, very complex, and as I said, very risky. There's a variety of legacy systems that people are moving from. So, that means that there's not the opportunity to just repeat what you did last time, unless you're moving from the same migration path every time, from the same source system to the same target system. Then you haven't got that repeatability that the partners would ideally like. So we're kind of building a tool that will take that problem away. So we'll find the repeatable pain points and code those out. And then if partners are dealing with the variety of source systems, we've done the heavy lifting to make sure that we support all those different source systems, and we've built the repeatability into our product.
So let's talk about that. You mentioned about the repeatability. And I think you might be able to unpack this even further about just your general approach, how it's so fundamentally different from a lot of the manual or semi-manual migrations partners have been doing, just the past several years. So maybe let's unpack a little bit about how your approach is so different.
Yeah, it's the automation. So as I said earlier, the old way of doing things was to extract the data from the source system, manipulate it manually, check it, validate it, cleanse it, and then take all of that data and import it into the new system. And you have to do that a number of times, don't forget, because this is a long-running project where you're configuring the system and training people on it and all that kind of stuff. So you've got to do the data migration over and over again, because the source system is still moving through the life of the project and the data is changing. What we do is we reduce that to just literally a click of a button, waits for some elapsed time, obviously, and then the data is migrated. And we can date chunk it as well, which makes the whole process much less risky, because what you can do is that earlier in the project, you can take the historic data up to, say, the start of the current financial year or the end of the previous financial year. And then closer to the project end, all the way up to the go live, then you're just dealing with the last few open periods, or the periods that were open when you started the project. So you're taking a massive amount of risk out of that final cutover as well. Proof is in the pudding. You can fully reconcile the data, the trial balance, the vendor balances, the customer balances. You can reconcile all of those things at any point in the project. And then finally, after the production cutover, you can re-reconcile those reconciliation points.
So I know, in addition to the automation, right, and what you were just sharing a little bit about, one of the other things that really stands out is your pre-sale license model. Can you explain how that works and why it's such a game changer for partners?
So the pre-sale license does exactly what the full software does. So you can migrate any chunk of data, you can migrate all the data, you can do time-stamped migrations, but only into a sandbox, not into production. So this allows for a couple of very big things. First of all, now when you demo the system to a prospect, you don't need to use Microsoft sample data. You can actually demo it with the customer's real data in a sandbox. The second thing you can do is proof of concepts. Proof of concepts can be very expensive to set up if you're going to migrate real data in, or you have to use, once again, synthetic data. But with the pre-sale license, you can actually migrate the real data as much as you want, and the customer can run it alongside their real production system. So this helps kind of ease the process internally from the customer, so that people who are naysayers or worried or wondering whether it will work can actually see it work. The other thing about the pre-sale license, which, and we're not going to get into commercials at this stage at all, but it's fully refundable. We do not see this as something to make money on. We see this as an enabler. So when we say fully refundable, we literally give the money back when you buy a license. It's there to help partners grow their sales, and of course that means reducing the risk to the customer, which the internal sponsors are going to like, and shorten the sales cycle, which, when you speak to everybody in the Microsoft ecosystem, and particularly Microsoft, anything that gets licensed used quickly is something that you see their eyes light up.
That's fantastic. So I want to, kind of build on that a little bit for those, partners that are listening that, are either have, migrations, things that, just some clients that are needing migrations. Maybe can you kind of unpack a little bit more about what kind of impact does being able to spin up a sandbox proof of concept have on building trust with clients?
Obviously, you're getting my view of this and not necessarily speaking to the partners directly. It's a game changer.
Yeah.
The other thing we did very early on was when we looked at our pricing model, we decided that we didn't want to have any limitations on how many times you migrate, on how much data you migrate. We didn't want to get into like the BitTitan world of paying more if you've got a lot of data to migrate. So the way we've set up our licensing is we tie the license to the customer migration. Now, this allows both in the pre-sale and the real license the partner to migrate as many times as required. So if they need to do 5 different time sliced for various reasons to fit into the business needs of the customer, they can do that. That was something that we intentionally did because we see this as a key tool to enable the smooth transition. There's a lot going on when people change their financial systems. I kind of liken it to a bit of a heart transplant in a person. This is, if you speak to companies, it is probably outside of email their core system. Everything runs on their finance and ERP. Changing it is high risk, and they don't do it lightly.
Yeah, and the other point I'd add to that is that you're actually, by using the pre-sale license and showing customers their data moving across, you're actually removing one of the biggest objections, which is it's going to be difficult to move my data. You're kind of addressing that up front. An experienced CFO that's done ERP migrations in his career will know that the data migration is a massive headache. So you showing them some of their data in the new system kind of on day zero, you're getting ahead of that objection before they've even raised it.
Well, that's the thing, just listening, as I was just thinking about from the sales conversation standpoint, is that in essence, you're removing just about, like the main obstacle to why, somebody would make this migration. So, to the point, Robert, that you made earlier about, with Microsoft, the big push, especially a lot of the migrations from GP, SL, and NAV, this could really create just an immense opportunity, for customers who need to, make that move, but also for the partners. That's going to be pretty exciting. What, is there anything else, maybe like in addition to, like what Jerry said, just, how else do you see this really changing the sales conversation?
I'm not sure there's much else. It's, to me, if I look at the sales hat on it, anything you do to de-risk a project up front, any guarantees you give, because as far as the customer is concerned, it's almost like, as I go back to my heart transplant analogy, I've got to do this, I want to do it, we need a better ERP system, or we need to get off our on-premise system, but oh boy, I'm worried. So anything you do to calm the nerves, de-risk, overcome the biggest hurdles, that's got to be an asset in the sales process. ERP sales are not something that happen on a whim or overnight. They are long, drawn-out cycles.
And did I hear you correctly when you said, kind of at the beginning here of this segment, where it's fully refundable?
Yeah. So the way we do the pre-sale license is, and I'm not going to get into numbers, but it's 10% of the real license, and when you buy a real license, you get it back, and that's unlimited. If you need 3 pre-sale licenses before you get your first sale, and of course Microsoft partners don't need that many, you'll get 30% back. There is no limit on this. We really do not see it. We see this as an enabler, not a profit center.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I also would like to kind of, maybe even just, backtrack a little bit, just talking about like with the migrations. And I think, Jerry, you talked about just being at just with one click, right? So at this idea of at the touch of a button, and, what a simple experience. Without revealing too much of the secret sauce, right? What does that actually look like in like the real world for our partner?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. Is what there's obviously a bit of setup to do, and there's a couple of options on the setup. So one option that we offer, for example, is to change the chart of accounts as part of the migration process. So CFOs love to change their chart of accounts. So we've had this chart of accounts for a few years where, it doesn't meet our business requirements anymore. We'd love to change it, and changing your ERP system, is a good opportunity to start with a fresh chart of accounts. So if you take that option, then we need you to feed the mapping of the old chart of accounts and the new chart of accounts into our migration tool. If you don't want to do that, and you just want to live with the same chart of accounts, then you don't have to do that config piece. You just leave it to run. The only other thing you have to do is, log into the legacy system, log into the new system. Choose a date range, which is quite important, because if you've got 10 years data in the old system, doing that in one run is going to take days potentially. So what we do is we'll chunk that up usually by financial year. So you'll do a year at a time. But once you've chosen the date range, once you've logged into the source and target system, you literally just press the migrate data button. It reports back to you, obviously, on progress as it goes along. It starts with the master data, then does all of the sales ledger, purchase ledger, cash book, journals, just chugs its way through, and then gives you a nice report at the end to show you how much data has been migrated across. Once you're happy with that period, then you just run it again for a new period.
That's fascinating. I still, I believe you. It's just unbelievable. It just seems really that you've really reduced removed the risk and the complexity. It's also something that was mentioned earlier. I kind of go back to about how a lot of companies they would have to settle with just only migrating a certain amount of data. And again, as somebody as an outsider, if you will, just the idea of not migrating all of your historical financial data it didn't seem real. It's like, why would you not move that over? And so, hearing you guys talk, like, what's unique about your approach is that it's not just about moving data, but because you're able to move all that historical data, in essence, what you're doing is preserving financial intelligence, which can really give these companies building on, giving them a competitive advantage because they have preserved all that financial intelligence, especially now with what AI can do. So again, without maybe revealing all the secret sauce, how does Ledger Migrator ensure the historical financial data becomes usable and not just stored?
Yeah, I mean that's done out of the box by Business Central, really, Anthony. So all we're doing is making sure that history comes across, from year one, whatever that is. Okay. It can be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. If you just go into Business Central with your master data and your opening balances, all that fantastic work that Microsoft are doing with Copilot and agents and all their AI functionality, that's not going to be usable for you until you've built up a fresh history. So you're probably going to be 2 or 3 years down the line before you can do anything with Copilot, because it just doesn't have any data to train the system with. With our tool, you're bringing all that history across. So that means from day one on Business Central, you've got the full functionality available to you. You've got enough data in there to train all your AI tools and your agents. And then you can just leave Microsoft and Business Central to do its wonderful work and give you all the help that you can get from those AI tools. And as you know, they're developing all the time with more agents and more Copilot functionality. So the sooner you've got your data in there, the sooner you can start making use of that functionality.
So can you guys share one example of a partner who's used Ledger Migrator and what changed for them, like before versus after?
So I'm going to talk about a partner without giving their name. So an American partner. Very specifically, they had a customer who has 9 companies in a group.
Wow.
And the challenge was to migrate all 9 companies as a group into Business Central. And it was very uneven in the amount of data. The operating companies, each individual operating companies varied between lots of data and just a little bit of data. So we even have a special license for this where after the primary license against that customer, where you've got to do additional companies, you get a reduced price additional license at a quarter of the cost. So they were able to use our tool to migrate all 9 seamlessly into Business Central. So that was, I think the way it was put to me is they just couldn't have done it. I mean, they could have sold some licenses, but there is no possible way manually that this company could have afforded to do it without automation. It just would have been, it was just broken all the budgets they were ever going to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon scenario to have some sort of group structure, which just makes that migration even more complex. It's already complex just for a single set of books, a single business, where you've got a group structure, you've got multiple sets of books and some consolidation going on. It just makes that challenge that was already difficult even more difficult. So the fact that we've managed to, solve this for a 9. I mean, 9's the most that we've done so far, but you could have a group of companies even larger than that potentially, and we'd offer the same service to them as well.
So going from on one end of the spectrum, being able to successfully, do this migration, for this with these 9 companies. The other end of the spectrum is impossible. Is there any way you can try to ballpark, maybe quantify, like what if somebody did try to attempt to do it manually or manually, what would be the man hours? It's like
yeah. That is a little bit about how long's a piece of string, but the average migration, if you just talk about not even a medium company, more in the small in the SMB, is probably going to be at least 15 to 25 days of labour if things go smoothly, and that's by no means on the larger size. That would be small, and that's why, of course, a lot of these companies didn't do it, because you ended up with a project to get you started in Business Central that was costing you the equivalent of 5 years licenses, and that once again leading the witness to say, well, do you really need that data? So it literally saves tens of thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the example Robert's quoting there is at the smaller end. This group of companies that we talked about earlier. I think you'd be looking at a minimum of 6 man-months to do something like that manually in the old-fashioned way, and bringing that down to being able to do it all in a day or 2 is just it's just an overwhelming change for the partner. They're absolutely delighted, and the customer as well.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, if I heard you correctly, you said typically something like this, not for the 6 to 9, the 9 company example, but for, small to medium, you said it's usually about a 6 to 9 month process, and using, with Ledger Migrator, you can get it down to 1 to 2 days. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, that was for the group of companies that we were saying. For the smaller simple companies, you're talking maybe taking 4 to 6 weeks, man-weeks of work down to, again, taking it down to a single day.
There's another thing you need to think about with this, and that is the type of companies that are buying Business Central. So there are really a couple of broad types. This is really broad. There are companies who are buying Business Central because they've outgrown their old system. So already they've got, they're a growing company, they need new features. But now when we talk about what's happening with Great Plains and SL and that, there are big companies out there who Microsoft are trying to migrate into Business Central. So now we're not talking about a growing company necessarily. We're talking about a company that's already reached quite a lot of maturity and has a lot of data. And that's in line with what Microsoft are trying to do over the next, as you know, there's a lot of focus they're putting on to getting people off Great Plains and SL at the moment.
Well, you guys have definitely developed a solution that's obviously, it helps facilitate obviously smarter, faster, and easier, data migrations. One question I have, and it just, popped up as just hearing you guys talk, is how do you ensure accuracy and quality with the data migrations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we touched on this slightly earlier, but it's guaranteeing. So what we're doing is warranting our software against those reconciliation reports. So for running things from the old system like your trial balance, your vendor balances, your bank balances, supplier balances, and making sure that all of that matches in the new system. And we provide unlimited technical support to make sure that's achieved. So if there is a reconciliation error anywhere in that process, then it's our responsibility to resolve that. So that will be reported through the partner back to us, and we'll work with the partner to fix that and rerun the migration until they're happy with it.
So I know, throughout I've heard, you're very, partner focused. I know, Robert, you've got, 10 plus years, involvement, experience with, IAMCP, and you've spoken openly about IAMCP's impact on your journey. How has this community shaped how you built, or how, not necessarily maybe how you built, but how you're planning, like with going to market, with Ledger Migrator?
First of all, I think it's worth examining why we are a partner-only play. So I'm going to steal an analogy that Jerry uses that I really like. He calls us the removal vans in people who are moving home. And the truth is, if you move home, having a removal van is important, but you can't just move home with that. You need a realtor, you need a title company, you need all the other things. So what we provide is a tool, but it's only one of the tools that partners bring to bear when they are bringing customers into Business Central. So once we identified that this was purely a partner play and we were going to Microsoft partners, in my view, there is no better ecosystem than the IAMCP. I took part in P2P, as they call them, partner-to-partner events, both on the web and also locally in the UK. Needs to be said that we have got the majority of our active partners via IAMCP from these events. IAMCP have introduced me to people at these events. What I found really helpful is you've just got to ask, and there's lots of mentoring and lots of advice that you get. Free of charge, people just are willing to contribute to give you good advice. So we have now got the majority of our partners through IAMCP. It's enabled us to grow more quickly in North America than the UK, which sounds a bit counterintuitive as we're a UK company, but there are various reasons for that, including Microsoft's footprint and where they're putting their focus and where the legacy systems are larger. But IAMCP has provided that medium for us to get our message out. And I actually think it's been the most successful of all our marketing campaigns has been through IAMCP.
Excellent. Well, when you, and this could be for, either you, Robert, or Jerry, but when you guys were decided, to go, focus, on selling through partners, why did you decide to go all in on a partner-only model instead of selling direct?
Do you want to take that, Jerry, or shall I?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I mean, I think if a customer's making that journey anyway, the ERP journey from one system to another, they need to engage with a partner that can cover all of the aspects, as Robert was alluding to. They have to be able to configure the system. They have to be able to train the end users. They have to be able to customize if necessary, integrate with other systems. So the data migration is just one part of that overall ERP migration. It's a big part of it, but it's not the entire project. So, the partner has to be there, and, we are not that partner. We're just helping the partner with that data migration piece. So it doesn't really make sense for us to try and sell our tool to the end user, because they're still going to have to engage with the partner to do all the other pieces. I think it was clear to us from the outset that, our customer was the Business Central partner, and we're just helping them help their customers.
I think I'll come in on something here, and it kind of links a bit back to IAMCP and advice. Originally, we were circulating our name, Ledger Migrator, but it soon became clear that when you spoke to partners, and IAMCP people said this to me, is that we should be a white label program. But actually, how the partner uses our tool, how the partner presents our tool, is up to the partner. We're just a tool that they are using. We're going to underwrite it to the partner, but as far as the customer's concerned, the customer's expecting the partner to deliver. And the customer actually has no interest in us. They really don't care what tool the partner's using, because they're saying, we've engaged you, Mr. Partner, and you have to deliver for us.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. Robert, I know just in the course of our conversation here today, and even in some of the prior conversations, you didn't just join IAMCP. You showed up. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. Why did you reconnect with the community years later, and how has that changed things for you?
He's not here on the call, but I can name check Eddie Bader.
Yes.
One of the reasons I stayed involved in IAMCP, even at a distance when I wasn't necessarily working for partner, was because I believe in the ethos they have of self-help, of actually being a community that helps its members, and also that ties into Microsoft, because they've got people who really understand Microsoft. And much as I'm a Microsoft fan, understanding Microsoft and everything is a it's a full-time job. So they were really helpful with that. So that was the kind of long-term keeping in touch. And although, as I said, I took a contract with Microsoft for a while and did a couple things, I always wanted to stay in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. When we launched this, and I looked at the best routes to market, and there are other routes. There's CSPs that sell licenses that also provide professional services that we can sell through. IAMCP provides the best community to have instant conversations, and not just one-way conversations where you speak to people and you get your 10 seconds, you get your elevator pitch. I mean, there was even one session I went on where I won't mention who was running it, but they listened to your pitch that you and what you're offering, and then the whole room gave feedback and said, well, that's good, but have you thought of, well, have you got this covered? So it was that feedback loop and that positive environment. And as I say, I've been a member a few times with different offerings, and I've always found that feedback, that partner to partner motion, that the sell with, and it's interesting with Microsoft, with the way they're now doing the marketplace, making it more formally easy for partners to cooperate than it used to be. But I think IAMCP was ahead of Microsoft in its game there in partner to partner cooperation.
That's awesome. I love that quote. You said the best community to have instant conversations. I know when Eddie listens to that, as well as several others, that's going to put a smile on their faces. That's so true. I mean, you hear that a lot. So I appreciate you sharing that. Let's now kind of maybe shift a little bit to talking about kind of the road ahead and just the future of like migrations and Microsoft partners. Years from now, how do you think the automated migration will change the Microsoft partner model?
Yeah, I mean, for us, if we look at it from a Ledger Migrator lens first, for us it's about covering all of the most common migration paths. So we're constantly looking for the partners to feedback to us. You've got all of these migration paths covered, but adding this one and this one would be really helpful. So that's a continuous dialogue, really, and we're trying to focus on the migration paths that are most useful to the partners that we're talking to. The end goal for the Business Central partners is that the whole world is using Business Central, and eventually they put us out of business, don't they, by getting everybody onto Business Central, and the partners can just happily keep their customers happy with ongoing support and customizations and so forth. And our job is done at that point. But until everybody's on Business Central, then there's a role for us in that ecosystem, and we're here to evolve with the partners and make sure that we're supporting them wherever they need support to get their customers across to Business Central.
Excellent. And so I do have just kind of a final question, but it's actually going to be, I'm going to kind of split it a little bit. So it's going to be you'll hear where it's kind of, in essence, there's the same question, but there's two different angles. That's like, if you can give one piece of advice to Microsoft partners navigating data migrations right now, would it be? But then I'm also, as a piggyback on that, is because I know, Robert, you've talked so much about partners. If you can give one piece of advice to Microsoft partners, navigating, partnerships and building partnerships right now, what would it be? So let's start with maybe the first one. If you can give one piece of advice to partners navigating data migrations right now, what would it be?
Okay, so this is going to be biased, but it would be use Ledger Migrator. You automate everything, have
That's
a little manual input.
Right?
Well, I mean, yes, it is biased, but we would say, why do things manually when there's tools?
Yeah.
When you talk about financial data, use Ledger Migrator.
Now, what's the best way then to get a hold of you guys? Is it through LinkedIn, your website?
Either will be good. We have a form on our website a partner can fill out for a demo. Both Jerry and I are on LinkedIn, and I put all my contact details on LinkedIn so people can just reach out by phone. For the American partners, we have an American number as well. So
excellent.
We do operate in both continents.
I was just saying, we're going to have all those links in the show notes for those that are listening or watching. So we'll have that available for folks as well.
And with regard to advice for Microsoft partners, I've always felt, and this is growing now because Microsoft, what they're doing with the marketplace, you can't be all things to all customers. So having strong alliances with other partners that complement you is the way to go. I mean, obviously there's a few enormous Microsoft partners, but that's not really who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about Accenture and people like that. Most partners have a specialization, and having an ecosystem of other partners that complement your specialization, that's I believe, very powerful message to the market.
That's fantastic.
The one thing I would add as well is it's a two-way process, as Robert touched on earlier. So if we haven't got a migration path covered that you really need, then come and talk to us. We can build it.
Mm-hmm. Well, excellent. Well, Robert, Jerry, this has been fantastic. I mean, it's been very insightful. As you've covered a lot, just in terms of with the migrations, and and I know. Our company, we work with a lot of partners, and believe me, I've built, many campaigns to customers, migrating, from, GP, SL and NAV to Business Central. So this has been fantastic, as well as just, like your insights on partnering and, the value, of the IAMCP community. So really appreciate your time today, and you guys have a great rest of the day.
Cheers, Anthony. Thanks for your time as well.
A big thank you to our guests from Ledger Migrator for joining us today and for sharing how they're rethinking one of the toughest challenges in Business Central implementations and turning it into a strategic advantage for partners. Episodes like this remind us that innovation in the Microsoft ecosystem doesn't just come from new features. It comes from partners solving real problems together. If you're a Microsoft partner navigating data migrations today, this is one of those conversations that should spark new ideas about how you serve clients and how you can scale your business. You can connect with Robert and Jerry on LinkedIn or visit their website at www.ledgermigrator.com. If you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share it with a fellow partner, and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps more people in the community find these stories. And if you're not already a part of IAMCP, consider joining your local chapter and getting involved. The connections you make here can shape your next opportunity. To learn more about IAMCP, visit the website at www.iamcp.org. Thanks for listening to the IAMCP Profiles and Partnership Podcast. We'll see you in the next episode.